The Galactic Council called Paraxis 7 a death world. They said it belonged to monsters. 3 different species had tried to settle there over the past 1,000 years. None of them had survived longer than a week. The creatures that ruled that world matched the dragon legends of 100 different planets. They breathed fire hot enough to melt steel. Their scales could stop plasma rounds. Their claws could tear through starship armor like paper. When the human survey ship, Prometheus, lost its engines and crashed into the northern mountains of Paraxis 7, the Galactic Council held a brief moment of silence. 12 humans, they said. Such a waste. But at least the death would be quick. Commander Elena Vasquez pulled herself from the wreckage and looked at the alien sky. Purple clouds rolled across an orange horizon. The air smelled like sulfur and copper. Behind her, her crew was already working to salvage what they could from the broken ship. They had food for 3 weeks, water for 2. Their distress beacon was damaged, and repairs would take at least a month. They set up camp in a cave near the crash site. Dr. Marcus Chan, the ship's linguist, complained about the smell. Engineer Yuki Tanaka complained about the broken equipment. Pilot James Okonkwo complained about everything. But they worked. Humans always worked. The first dragon came on the 2nd day. Alana heard it before she saw it. A sound like thunder mixed with the roar of a furnace. She stepped out of the cave and looked up. Against the purple sky, something massive was descending. Wings that blocked out the sun. Scales that glittered like molten gold. Eyes that burned with ancient intelligence. The council species had tried many things against the dragons of Paraxis 7. The Vorthani had deployed military assault units with the best weapons their empire could build. The dragons had melted them in seconds. The Kreth had attempted orbital bombardment, turning entire regions into glass. The dragons had simply moved underground until it stopped, then emerged angrier than before. The Melodari had tried force fields and sonic weapons and chemical agents. Nothing worked. Alana Vasquez grabbed a fire extinguisher. The dragon landed 50 meters from the cave entrance. The ground shook. Rocks tumbled down the mountainside. Its head swung toward the camp, and Elena could see flames building in the back of its throat. This was how it had destroyed the others. This was how it would destroy them. The fire came. A blast of heat and light that should have turned Elena to ash in an instant. The temperatures reached levels that would have vaporized most organic matter. The other species had never found a defense against dragon fire. They had tried shields and armor and bunkers. They had never tried walking into it. Elena moved forward. Fire extinguisher raised, spraying white foam into the flames. Her EVA suit was designed for spacewalks in the corona of stars. It could handle heat that would melt rock. And more than that, she was human. Her species had been playing with fire for over 1 million years. They had learned its moods, its patterns, its secrets. Fire was not humanity's enemy. Fire was humanity's oldest friend. The dragon stopped breathing flames. It stared at Elena with those burning eyes, and for the first time in its ancient life, it felt something it had never felt before. Confusion. This small, soft creature was not running. It was not fighting. It was not dying. It was just standing there, pointing a metal tube at the dragon's face and making the fire go away. Elena lowered the extinguisher. Her heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst. But she kept her voice calm. She had read every scrap of research on Paraxian dragons. The council said they were mindless beasts. The council said communication was impossible. But Elena had noticed something in the old recordings. The way the dragons moved. The way they seemed to coordinate. The way they had specifically targeted weapons and supplies while leaving bodies alone. Mindless beasts did not make tactical decisions. She reached slowly for the tablet on her belt. The dragon watched her every move. One twitch of its claws could cut her in half. One breath could end her life, despite the suit. But it was waiting. It was curious. Dr. Chun appeared at the cave entrance, his face pale with terror. He saw what Elena was doing and understood immediately. He pulled out his own equipment and began recording. Sound waves, movement patterns, anything that might help them decode whatever language these creatures used. Elena held up the tablet. On the screen, she displayed simple images. A circle, a square, a triangle. Then she pointed at herself and made a sound. She pointed at the dragon and waited. The dragon tilted its massive head. Its throat rumbled with something that was not fire. A sound. A response. Behind Elena, her crew emerged from the cave one by one. They stood in a line, not with weapons, but with tools. Recording devices. Translation software. Emergency rations held out like offerings. The Galactic Council had sent warriors to fight the dragons. They had sent scientists to study them from orbit. They had sent diplomats who never left their ships. Humans were the first to stand in front of a dragon and simply try to talk. The dragon lowered its head until its eye was level with Elena's face. She could see herself reflected in that golden surface. Small, fragile, absolutely terrified. But she did not run. She smiled. The dragon made another sound. Dr. Chen's equipment went wild with data. And somewhere in the back of Elena's mind, a very human thought formed. If these things were truly intelligent, then humanity had a very different approach than war. They had questions to ask. And maybe, just maybe, answers to offer. 3 months passed on Paraxis 7. The humans did not die. They did not flee. They did not even try to fight. Instead, they did something that confused the dragons more than anything else in 10,000 years of memory. They kept trying to talk. Dr. Marcus Chum had spent his entire career studying alien languages. He had decoded the mathematical signals of the Vorthani. He had translated the chemical markers of the Kreth. He had even learned to interpret the color patterns of the Melodari. But dragon communication was different. It was not just sound. It was subsonic vibrations that traveled through rock and air and bone. It was body language that involved wings and tails and the subtle shifting of scales. It was fire itself, controlled in ways that carried meaning. It took him 2 months to understand the basics. It took another month to say his first complete sentence. The dragons called themselves the Seer. They called their world Mother Fire. And they called humans something that translated roughly to the strange soft ones who do not burn. Commander Elena Vasquez met regularly with the dragon matriarch. Her name was Cervantes, and she was older than human civilization. Scars covered her scales from battles fought before Elena's ancestors had learned to write. She was the largest dragon on the planet, and she was dying. They were all dying. Dr. Chun made the discovery during a routine scan of the dragon nesting grounds. The seer had allowed humans to visit their most sacred place, something they had never done for any other species. Elena thought it was a sign of trust. It was actually a cry for help. The eggs were failing. Out of every 100 laid, only 3 or 4 would hatch. And of those, half would die within their first year. The seer had watched their numbers fall for 10,000 years. Where once millions had filled the skies of Paraxis 7, now only a few thousand remained. Dr. Chun analyzed the dead eggs for weeks. He compared healthy shells to failed ones. He ran chemical tests and genetic scans and environmental studies. When he finally brought his findings to Elena, his hands were shaking. The dragons were not hoarding gold because they were greedy. They needed it to survive. The mineral compounds and precious metals were essential to dragon reproduction. Without them, the shells of their eggs would not form properly. The developing embryos would suffocate before they could hatch. For 10,000 years, the seer had desperately gathered every scrap of gold and silver and platinum they could find. It was never enough. And every species that landed on Paraxis 7 brought mining equipment. The Vorthani had come for the rich mineral deposits in the southern continents. The Kreth had wanted the rare metals in the northern mountains. The Melodari had sought resources for their growing empire. They had all seen dragons as obstacles to be removed. They had never asked why the dragons fought so hard to protect certain areas. They had never realized they were trying to strip mine nurseries. Elena brought this information to Cervantes. She explained what she had learned. She apologized for all the species that had come before, even though humanity had nothing to do with those invasions. And then she made an offer. Humans had more gold than they knew what to do with. On Earth, it sat in vaults doing nothing. People wore it as decoration. Industries used it for electronics that would be thrown away within a few years. What if humans shared some of that gold with the seer? Cervantes was quiet for a long time. Dragons did not trust easily. Every species that had visited their world had tried to take from them. Every single one. She asked what humans could possibly want in return. Elena thought about the question carefully. Trade worked best when both sides got something valuable. Humans needed things too. They needed allies. They needed friends. They needed to show the galaxy that they were different from the species that had come before. And there was something else. Something that had been growing in Elena's mind since the first day she had stood in dragonfire and refused to run. She asked Cervantes how she felt about terrifying their enemies. The old dragon laughed. It was a sound like an earthquake mixed with a forest fire. She had not laughed in 500 years. But this small, soft, clever creature had said something that made her feel young again. The dragons had spent 10,000 years defending against invasion. They had never considered the alternative. They had never imagined joining forces with another species. They had never thought anyone would want them as allies instead of obstacles. Elena spent the next week drafting a formal agreement. It was the first diplomatic treaty between humans and dragons. It covered trade and territory and mutual defense. It established communication protocols and cultural exchanges. It set rules for how many humans could visit the nesting grounds and how many dragons could visit human ships. But most importantly, it was built on something that no other species had ever offered. The SYR.respect. Dr. Chun sent a message to Earth explaining what they had discovered and what they had done. The response took 3 weeks to arrive because of the damaged communications equipment. When it came, it was a single word repeated over and over by mission control, by the press, by governments around the world. Impossible. But humans had always specialized in impossible things. The message from Paraxis V reached the Galactic Council 6 months after the Prometheus had crashed. The Council had already written off the human crew as dead. They had filed reports and sent condolences and moved on to other matters. The message forced them to reconsider. Commander Elena Vasquez was alive. Her entire crew was alive. And they had done something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made friends with dragons. The Vorthani ambassador demanded proof. He did not believe it. Could not believe it. His people had lost 200 soldiers trying to establish a presence on Paraxis 7. His people had declared the dragons a galactic threat that needed to be exterminated. His people had spent 3 centuries building weapons specifically designed to kill them. Elena provided proof through a live transmission. The image showed her sitting on the back of Cervantes, soaring over a settlement that had grown around the Prometheus crash site. Humans walked the streets below. Dragons perched on the cliffs above. Children from the local science station played games, while young dragons watched with curious eyes. The council fell into chaos. How had they done it? What weapon had they used? What technology had they developed? What trick had they played? Elena answered their questions calmly. She had used no weapons. She had developed no special technology. She had played no tricks. She had simply walked up to a dragon and tried to have a conversation. The council did not understand. They could not understand. Every species they had ever encountered dealt with threats the same way. If something was dangerous, you destroyed it. If something was powerful, you conquered it. If something was different, you eliminated it. That was how the galaxy worked. That was how survival worked. Humans, apparently, had missed that memo. Dr. Marcus Chun presented his research to the council through the transmission. He explained what he had learned about dragon intelligence. They were not beasts. They had culture and history and language. They remembered events from 10,000 years ago. They told stories to their young. They mourned their dead. Every species in the galaxy had legends about dragons. Cosmic evolution had created similar apex predators on dozens of worlds, and every species had responded to those creatures the same way. They had hunted them, killed them, driven them to extinction. The Vorthani had wiped out their dragons 5,000 years ago. The Kreth had done it 3,000 years ago. Even the peaceful Melodari had hunted their dragons until none remained. It was considered a mark of civilization. A species could not truly advance until it had eliminated the monsters that threatened it. Humans had not done this. Dr. Chun showed them the old stories from Earth. Tales where dragons could be bargained with. Legends where clever heroes talked instead of fought. Myths where the monster in the cave turned out to be lonely or cursed, or simply misunderstood. Humans had killed a lot of their dragons too, he admitted. But they had also imagined other possibilities. They had dreamed of a world where humans and dragons could coexist. And when they finally met real dragons, they had decided to try making those dreams come true. The Kreth representative asked why. Why take such a risk? Why waste resources on creatures that could never benefit them? Why not simply destroy the threat and take the planet for themselves? Elena answered this question herself. She said that humans did not see dragons as threats. They saw them as neighbors. Humans had always lived alongside dangerous creatures. They had shared their world with wolves and bears and lions. They had learned that sometimes the best way to deal with a predator was not to fight it, but to work with it. The council debated for days. Some wanted to declare humanity a threat to galactic stability. Others wanted to study their methods. A few quietly wondered if they had made a terrible mistake in how they had handled their own dragons. Meanwhile, Elena was already thinking bigger. Paraxis 7 was not the only world with dragons. The Council's own records showed dozens of planets where similar creatures still existed. Most were classified as death worlds. All were avoided by civilized species. But if humanity could make peace with the dragons of Paraxis 7, why stop there? She sent messages to Earth requesting volunteers. Scientists and diplomats and ordinary people who were willing to take a chance. People who could look at a monster and see a potential friend. People who could stand in fire and refuse to burn. The responses came faster than she expected. Humans, it turned out, had been waiting for dragons their whole lives. 20 years passed after the first human landed on Paraxis 7. In that time, everything changed. The Terran Confederacy had grown from a small group of colonies into a major galactic power. They had technology and resources and ships that could match any other species. But their real strength was something the galaxy had never seen before. They had dragons. Not just the dragons of Paraxis 7. Humanity had reached out to every world where similar creatures survived. They had found the ice worms of Valdoria, massive serpents that breathed freezing cold instead of fire. They had found the crystal dragons of Theta Majoris, silicon-based beings that ate minerals and grew gemstones on their scales. They had found the shadow drakes of the umbral sector, creatures that could phase through solid matter and strike from impossible angles. Every species had tried to kill these creatures. Humanity had tried to talk to them, but it did not always work. Some dragon species were too different, too alien, too hostile. But enough of them responded to human overtures that word spread across the galaxy. If you were a monster that everyone wanted dead, humans might offer you something else. A place to live, food to eat, purpose to serve. And in return, humans got friends. Admiral Maya Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Confederacy flagship. She was Elena's daughter, raised alongside dragon clutch siblings on Paraxis 7. Her godmother was Cervantes herself. She had learned to fly before she learned to walk. Carried on the back of dragons who treated her as one of their own. Now she commanded the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. The hegemony of Kroth had declared war 3 weeks ago. They were an aggressive species that had conquered 17 star systems through overwhelming force. They looked at the Terran Confederacy and saw easy targets. Soft beings without natural weapons. Primitive creatures who wasted time talking instead of fighting. They expected human ships, human soldiers, human tactics. They did not expect the Dragon Auxiliary. The Battle of Embers. Gate began when the Krath fleet jumped into the system. 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons. They outnumbered the human fleet 2 to 1. Their commanders were confident. Their soldiers were eager. Victory seemed certain. Then the asteroids started moving. 300 dragons emerged from the field where they had been hiding. Paraxian fire drakes in specially designed void suits. Valdorian ice worms wrapped in thermal protection. Crystal dragons from Theta Majoris, their gemstone scales glittering in the starlight. All of them carrying weapons that humans had built specifically for them. All of them trained to fight alongside human ships. The Krath fleet had never faced anything like this. Their weapons were designed to fight other ships. Their tactics were built around predictable enemy movements. Dragons did not follow those rules. They dove through the Krath formations, breathing fire and ice and toxic clouds. They phased through hulls and emerged inside ships. They coordinated with human fighters in patterns no computer could predict. Within an hour, 17 Krath ships had surrendered. Within 3 hours, the battle was over. The hegemony of Krath requested peace talks the next day. Admiral Vasquez met with the Krath ambassador on neutral ground. The ambassador was shaking. He had watched recordings of the battle over and over, trying to understand what he had seen. He asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the first dragon had appeared. How? Maya smiled. It was the same smile her mother had worn 20 years ago, standing in dragon fire and refusing to burn. She explained that humans saw the universe differently than other species. Most civilizations looked at strange and dangerous creatures and thought about how to destroy them. Humans looked at the same creatures and thought about how to work with them. It was not always smart. It was not always safe. Humans had been killed trying to befriend things that could not be befriended. But enough times, often enough, the gamble paid off. Wolves became dogs. Wild horses became partners. And dragons became allies. The Krath ambassador asked if this was some kind of trick. Some elaborate deception designed to frighten enemies into submission. Maya shook her head. There was no trick. Humans genuinely believed that the universe was full of potential friends. They genuinely believed that even the most terrifying creatures might have something valuable to offer. They genuinely believed that talking was better than fighting. And the dragons? The dragons had spent thousands of years being hunted by species that feared them. Humans were the first to offer something different. Humans were the first to see them as people instead of monsters. That created a loyalty that amount of force could match. The peace treaty was signed 1 week later. The hegemony of Krath agreed to release all conquered worlds. They agreed to pay reparations to species they had attacked. They agreed to open diplomatic relations with the Terran Confederacy, and they asked, quietly, if humans might teach them how to talk to their own dragons. Maya said yes. 20 years ago, one woman had stood in front of a fire-breathing monster and tried to have a conversation. Now that simple act had changed the galaxy. Cervantes lived long enough to see it happen. She died peacefully, surrounded by her human friends, and her dragon children, and a universe that had finally learned what she had always known. Monsters were just neighbors that nobody had bothered to meet. Humans had bothered, and that made all the difference.